Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Canadian premiers in Washington today to sway lawmakers away from Trump's tariffs. Plus, Canadian Taxpayers Federation says Mark Carney plans to hide the carbon tax with sneaky tactics. We speak with Chris Sims of the CTF, who explains. And a strike by Alberta school support workers could soon grow as 2,400 staff vote to join the job action.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. Canada's premiers headed to the White House today. It's the first time in history all 13 premiers have been in Washington at the same time. They met with the U.S. president's senior advisors to try to stave off Donald Trump's ongoing tariff threats. The premiers have been telling business groups and Republican lawmakers in Washington this week that both countries would be hurt in a trade war. Trump has signed executive orders to impose 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports into the United States starting March 12th. He previously threatened 25% across-the-board tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports with a lower 10% levy on Canadian energy. That plan has been delayed until at least March the 4th.
I'm so grateful as chair to have such a talented group standing with me right here, and all different perspectives around the country. And every perspective is really concerning their area, but do you know what everyone agrees on? Is protecting Canada as a whole. What success looks like is zero tariffs. We're their largest trading partner, we're their #1 customer, and I'm not too sure if they fully understand the impact on both countries, both sides of the border. Inflation will happen, interest rates will go up, plants will be closed on both sides of the border.
During the question period with reporters, New Brunswick Premier Susan Holt took issue with the notion that Premier's actions have not been successful yet.
I think that the proposal that this hasn't been successful is false. We heard that tariffs were going to come in place on January 20th, and they didn't. We heard tariffs were going to come in place in February, and they didn't. We now have a reprieve till March, and we have a phenomenal team, Canada, that is here and united, engaging with Americans who agree that they see the impact that this is going to have on Americans who don't want to pay more money for gas and who don't want to pay more money for food, and they don't want to pay more. And so we are getting a lot of support from the Americans that we're meeting with, businesses, senators, congresspeople alike, who all agreed that these tariffs are going to have a negative impact on the U.S., and we're seeing that progress in how the tariffs continue to get pushed off.
Canada's fentanyl czar says he'll work with his U.S. counterpart to improve Canada's efforts to detect and disrupt the trade of the drug. Former RCMP Deputy Commissioner Kevin Brozo was introduced to the public today at a border crossing in Lansdowne, Ontario. He says more details about what he'll be doing in his new position will be released in the coming days. The role of fentanyl czar was created in response to President Trump threatening to impose steep tariffs on all goods from Canada, citing the flow of illegal drugs.
I'm hoping to be able to give an intensity to the work being carried out by thousands of men and women in this country and the United States, trying to deal with the real public safety and national security crisis that is fentanyl. Bringing that integrated approach, bringing the teams together, ensuring the collaboration, ensuring the communication is happening at officials level on both sides of the border in communities across the country.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, meantime, speaking from Washington, says her team has already been in touch with the fentanyl czar and says it's a step in the right direction for Canada.
I think diplomacy is working. I think that the fact that we got a 30-day reprieve was because we agreed to work on the cross-border problem of fentanyl. I was pleased to see the federal government announced a fentanyl czar, and my administration has already been in touch with him to talk about how in Alberta we can lend to the success of those efforts. So what I would say is what I've seen from this president is that he is prepared to make a deal. We've made a deal on that. I think we can make a deal on steel and aluminum by making very much the same argument that I've been making on energy and critical minerals. We've won the argument that those raw materials are essential to American success. It comes in, it makes value-added products, it creates good American jobs, it creates good American products that we buy back. Same thing for aluminum. They just do not make enough for their defense industry, their auto industry, and their critical needs. So I think aluminum, we can make the very same argument, and on steel, we buy as much steel products from them as they buy from us.
At that same press conference, Smith was asked when she became aware of concerns over contract negotiations at Alberta Health Services. Smith says if there was any wrongdoing found, they would like to get to the bottom of it.
Well, I'm glad that we're going to have the Auditor General take a look at it. I first became aware of it when I saw the newspaper reporting on it, and we're interested in hearing what the Auditor General has to say. We've already set up a shared file so that they can get all of the documents that we have to see if there is any wrongdoing. If there's wrongdoing, we'd like to get to the bottom of it. And if there isn't, we need to find out why AHS is standing in the way of charter surgical centres.
The allegations stem from AHS's former CEO claiming she was fired for pointing out concerns over Alberta Health Minister Adriana LaGrange stripping AHS of its power to negotiate contracts of private surgical facilities. And while our government officials are dealing with allegations, tariff threats, and border issues, there is still a leadership race underway. A new poll suggests that if Mark Carney wins the Liberal leadership race, he would erase the massive lead the Conservatives have enjoyed over the past year and a half. Here is Kyle Dugan of the Canadian Press with more.
A new Leger poll paints a picture of how the frontrunners in the Liberal leadership race might fare leading their party against the federal Conservatives. If Mark Carney becomes the next Liberal leader, survey research suggests that the party would gain a 6-point bounce and erase the advantage held by the Conservative Party led by Pierre Poilievre. A Carney-led Liberal Party would garner 37% support, with the Tories also at 37% in a dead heat. But a Chrystia Freeland-led party would slide to 28% and leave the Conservatives in majority government territory. More Canadians also placed their trust in Carney with taking on U.S. President Donald Trump than did Freeland, at 20% to just 6%. Pollster Andrew Enns says this is a tough spot to be in for Freeland and an easy sales pitch for Carney's team. The poll reached more than 1,500 adults from February 7th to the 10th, but does not carry a margin of error since it's an online poll.
And according to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Liberal leadership candidate Mark Carney plans to hide the carbon tax, even though he's campaigning to get rid of it. According to the CTF, he's using sneaky tactics to hit businesses with a hidden carbon tax and apply stipulations to how people will spend it. To explain this in more detail is Chris Sims, the Alberta director of the CTF. Chris, welcome. Thanks for joining me. Now, the CTF is claiming Mark Carney is planning to hide the carbon tax. How is he planning to do this exactly?
So, number one, with his announcement, he was very careful in his language. He said that he wants to get rid of the consumer carbon tax. And in particular, he said that the current carbon tax had suffered from a perception problem, meaning that all of us who are getting upset looking at our home heating bills saying, why is my carbon tax $60 a month or $40 a month, whatever it is, that was all just our misperception. It wasn't the fact that we were getting screwed by the carbon tax. That wasn't the problem. It was all misperception. So Carney himself has said that he wants to make big polluters pay and get rid of the front-facing consumer carbon tax. The issue here is that in his mind, a big polluter is a producer of natural gas, which we use to heat our homes. A big polluter is a fuel refinery that is creating gasoline and diesel at the pumps. Those companies will not eat the cost of the carbon tax and make it go away. Those costs will be passed down to you and me. So we will still be paying the consumer carbon tax. We just won't see it because he's hiding it.
And Chris, the CTF is also saying that Carney is making it so that people can't just get the cash back to pay bills or buy groceries. It has to be spent in certain ways. So what's the plan here?
As it stands right now, some people get some cash back on the current carbon tax. Carney has stated himself he will get rid of those cash rebates and replace it with a plan where you earn, for lack of a better term, green points or Carney points, like we don't know what they're called. You have to save up these green points, and then you can use those green points to purchase government-approved machines, like a heat pump or a solar scooter or a washer dryer or a furnace. The issue here is that even though it's not enough money and even though not everybody gets them, at least some folks were getting some of their money back and it was cash and they could choose what to do with it. But a lot of central planner types in government, of which Carney is one, they get upset with that kind of cashy freedom. And they then want to control what you're doing with those purchases. So he says that he's going to replace the cash rebates with this point system. How much it's going to cost or how long it'll take you to build up points, we don't know.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was Chris Sims, Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Could there be an end in sight to the war in Ukraine? U.S. President Donald Trump said on Wednesday he held a lengthy and productive phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin about ending the war. Trump said on social media that the two also discussed a variety of topics and agreed to work closely together. He says negotiations are set to begin immediately between U.S. and Russian delegations. The White House said Trump also called Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and said the conversation went very well. However, while in Brussels, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said Ukrainian membership into NATO and the return of Ukraine's pre-2014 borders were unrealistic. The White House says negotiations are set to begin in Munich on Friday, with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio set to lead the U.S. delegation. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Ukrainians must be the ones who decide how the war with Russia ends.
One of the things Canada has been very clear about is that it is only Ukrainians that get to decide what is acceptable to them as an outcome of any peace negotiations. Obviously, people will have different perspectives around strategies, around positionings, but for us, it's very simple. Ukrainians are busy defending their sovereignty, their democracy. They're busy standing up for the rule of law as it applies in all of our democracies. Ukrainians get to decide what the outcome of that peace process must be.
Trudeau is wrapping up his one-day visit to Brussels to focus on deepening Canada's trade and defense ties with Europe. A strike by Alberta school support workers could soon grow as union locals representing more than 2,400 staff vote to join the job action. The Canadian Union of Public Employees says that includes more than 1,100 custodial and maintenance employees with the Calgary Public and Catholic school divisions. It also includes educational assistants and support staff with the Black Gold, Foothills, and Parkland divisions. They join more than 4,000 education support staff who have been on strike in Fort McMurray and the Edmonton region since the beginning of January. Alberta Minister of Art, Culture and Status of Women, Tanya Furr, announced a comprehensive strategy to end gender-based violence. The province is investing $15.7 million this year to bring in violence prevention methods and assist survivors, while the 10-year strategy is still in development. In addition, $7.2 million will go towards children and family services, while $3 million will support shelter resources found across the province.
I am announcing several initiatives that will support our government's response to gender-based violence, including supporting women's shelter programming to focus on access to safety and inclusive services, improving the reporting and prevention efforts at post-secondary institutions and First Nations colleges to address campus sexual violence, increasing service provider access to education and resources related to elder abuse, supporting academic research on gender-related injury and illness in the workplace, strengthening supports for Albertans navigating the justice system, including developing more survivor-centered, culturally sensitive, trauma-informed services, and implementing Indigenous-led initiatives that advance the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Roadmap.
The funding for the initiative is part of a $54 million bilateral agreement with the federal government. A new report from Equite Association shows that auto thefts across Canada continue to trend downwards. Thefts of private passenger vehicles decreased by 18.6% in 2024 from the previous year to just over 57,000 incidents. That's compared to historic highs in 2022 and 2023 with over 70,000 thefts each year. Equite says while the current number is still unreasonably high, there is anticipation that Transport Canada will release measures this year to potentially mandate auto manufacturers to modernize safety devices and prevent thefts. On a provincial basis, Quebec witnessed the largest decrease at 32.4%, attributed to vehicle recoveries and prevention methods at ports. Alberta saw a 10.1% decrease in 2024, a relatively minor change compared to the rest of the country besides Atlantic Canada. Boost is a new initiative that offers support to families facing financial hardship, payment of overdue rent and utilities, as well as assistance with food and hygiene needs are part of the support Boost aims to cover with the one-time fund. Jackie Zelisak, Executive Director of United Way Lethbridge, says the program recently received a $50,000 donation. Zelisak says the program is run by United Way of Lethbridge in southwestern Alberta and NMAX. She explains why it's so important to have this type of financial support for communities in need.
We're very thankful for the generous support that we've received. We're just seeing so many people that are in a financial difficulty situation like this, and with the generous support of NMAX, we're able to help support people in crisis. It's important because we don't want to have people entering further into poverty. The shelters are at maximum. It's an application process, so they do have to go through other steps before receiving any sort of support from United Way's Boost program. So they do have to apply to places like Lethbridge Housing and Alberta Supports and prove that they've done such things like that. And then if they apply through us, they're able to demonstrate that they've gone through such applications. And then if we're able to help, we can issue some funding to their utility company or to their landlord directly.
Zelisak encourages organizations wishing to donate to support the Boost program to contact United Way of Lethbridge directly. A Closer Walk with Patsy Cline is the show that reminds us of the American singer, songwriter, and pianist Patsy Cline. From this Thursday until February 22nd, New West Theatre brings this captivating production in which top-level artists with their voices will transport us back in time. Kelly Ray, artistic director at New West Theatre, gives more details about the charming show.
And this show is very much that. It's a jukebox musical. It's almost a fantasy concert of Patsy Cline. So it's nice to celebrate these songs and show these songs, which we know our audience loves, in a different package and a musical format.
Yeah, a little bit about this show is, well, it's the Patsy Cline story. We're kind of going through a catalog of music, which is quite extensive. I wasn't really familiar with a ton of it before we started. I'm like, oh, I know a lot of Patsy Cline songs, and I really didn't. I was like, oh my gosh. And so there's some as we've been going along, I'm like, oh, that's my new favorite. Oh, that's my new favorite kind of thing. But the show is, it basically takes Little Big Man, who's a DJ at WINC Winchester Radio.
Yeah, it's an actual radio station that launched Patsy's career, and is still an established and running radio station down in the States. And it was fundamental to where she got started. An interesting fact about this show is they don't grant the rights to just anybody. You have to have a singer that's capable of singing Patsy Cline to do this show. They protect the rights. They don't allow people to have the show unless they have a capable singer.
If you're familiar with any of Patsy Cline's songs, you're just going to absolutely adore it.
And some of her greatest hits to be performed include Walkin' After Midnight, Crazy, and I Fall to Pieces. Love all of those. Well, the month of February has been proving to us that winter is nowhere close to being over. More frigid temperatures are expected in the coming days, and I'll be right back to tell you if there's a reprieve in sight. Well, on Thursday, we'll be seeing a mix of sun and cloud with 30% a chance of flurries and, daytime high of minus 12 degrees, but feeling very, very chilly in the morning with that wind chill. We're going to be feeling some frostbite, minus 26 is what it's going to feel like in the morning. And even though we're not going to see very much wind, only 15 kilometers per hour, we can handle that. But then look at that. Daytime high on Friday of minus 21. Could see a chance of flurries, and then Saturday looking like a high of minus 18, going to jump up to minus 8 on Sunday. Not as horrible, mix of sun and cloud. Those flurries returning in on Sunday night through Monday. Minus 9 for the expected high on Monday and minus 7 to round out that 7-day forecast on Tuesday with mainly cloudy skies that day. So average high for this time of year is actually climbing to 2 degrees. Minus 10 is the average low for this time of year. 19 was the warm day in Lethbridge on this day back in 1934. And on this day back in 1936 was the coldest, which was minus 37. Sun rose this morning at 7:47. Sun set this evening at 5:45. Meaning we're just under 10 hours of daylight now, so 9 hours, 58 minutes to be exact. On the West Coast tomorrow, fairly decent, mostly sunny, but partly cloudy skies there. 3 degrees for the high in Victoria, 10 in Vancouver. 30% chance of flurries expected both Edmonton and Calgary tomorrow, but minus 21 for the high in Edmonton. So very cold. Minus 13 expected tomorrow in Calgary. Could see some sunshine later on in the day there. Extreme cold warning in effect for the rest of the prairies, Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Multi-day episode of very freezing temperatures and frigid wind chill, risk of frostbite in minutes. Minus 24 for the daytime high in Saskatoon, minus 22 in Regina. 30% chance of flurries in both of those cities. Sunshine expected tomorrow in Winnipeg, but that chilly minus 22 for the high. Now, as we get on over to the central part of the country here, Toronto seeing a 40% chance of flurries, 0 for the high. There is a winter storm warning in effect for both Ottawa and Montreal tomorrow. Minus 2 for the high expected, but up to 15 centimeters expected in both of those cities. Ottawa could actually see some risk of freezing rain, and we've got some blowing snow going on as well in Montreal with 30 to 50 kilometer per hour winds. Now we've got a snowfall warning in Fredericton. Fredericton also seeing up to 15 centimeters of snow. Could see some ice pellets mixed with that, some risk of freezing rain. Minus 8 for the high. A high of 0 expected in Halifax tomorrow with just 5 centimeters of snow. That's it. And then same thing for Charlottetown. 5 centimeters expected, minus 3 for the high, and minus 7 in St. John's with beautiful, lovely, clear skies and up to 40K winds. So there you have it. That is your forecast. Canadians are scouring labels at grocery stores as they continue to try to support homegrown products amid trade tensions with the U.S. Kraft Heinz is a multinational company that wants to buy in on the Buy Canadian trend to highlight any Canadian ties to their products. It's headquartered in the U.S. but employs more than 1,000 people at its Montreal factory where it makes Heinz ketchup, Kraft peanut butter, and Philadelphia cream cheese. Public relations expert Rachel Thexton says multinational brands are likely worried their sales could suffer because shoppers don't see their products as Canadian. U.S. President Donald Trump's threat to impose tariffs on aluminum and steel imports has shaken the Canadian can industry. The tariffs could have severe implications for companies that buy cans for things like beer and soup. Beer Canada's President C.J. Ailey says almost 90% of beer consumed in Canada is brewed domestically, but the majority of the cans are imported. He says the industry faces aluminum tariffs that are much higher than the 10% imposed during Trump's last term, costing the industry hundreds of millions of dollars. The Canada Pension Plans Investment Board, which operates and manages the fund, earned a net return of 3.8% in its latest quarter. It comes as CPP Investments' net assets grew to almost $700 billion at December 31st, up from the end of the previous quarter. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 68 points on the day to finish at 25,563. The Dow was down 225 points to 44,368. The S&P 500 was down 16 to 6051, and the Nasdaq was up 6 points to finish at 19,649. West Texas Intermediate oil was down 2.09 to 71.23 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 23 cents to 3.54 US. Gold was up 5.09 to 29.0394 US an ounce, and silver was up 39 cents to 32.22 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.57 per bushel. Barley is at $6.58. Canola is at $14.99, and corn is at $8.58 per bushel. Live cattle were down 53 cents to $199.15. Feeder cattle March contract was up 20 cents to $264.78. Lean hogs were up 73 cents to $89.45, and the Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at $69.90 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, Canada's premiers headed to the White House today. It's the first time in history all 13 premiers have been in the U.S. Capitol at the same time. They met with the U.S. president's senior advisors to try to stave off Donald Trump's ongoing tariff threats. The premiers have been telling business groups and Republican lawmakers in Washington this week that both countries would be hurt in a trade war. Coming up after the break, we are joined by Lane Lawson-Craft, best-selling author with her latest book, Warfare Parenting, where she gives valuable advice to parents who feel their kids are going down a dark path. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also check out our website and our YouTube page at any time to see some of our stories and more of our interviews. Well, parenting is a tough job, even if you have well-behaved children. But what if you have wayward, prodigal kids? So how do we respond as parents to that? Joining us from Florida today to share some solid advice on this is Lane Lawson-Craft. She is a public speaker, the host of the Warfare Parenting podcast, and a best-selling author, with her latest book being Warfare Parenting, a Daily Battle Plan to Fight for Your Child. Lane, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to share.
Okay, well, I understand that you and your husband raised 3 children in a faith-based home, a Christian home, and yet they each experienced their own, I guess, different journeys of rebellion and, as we would call, prodigal, I guess, like prodigal journey. So what were your initial responses? What kinds of things did your kids try to, what was going on there?
Right. Well, at the time, we thought these kids are just defiant. They're rebellious. They were driving us crazy. I think looking back, what we realized, we weren't fighting against our teenagers. We were fighting against a warfare in the spirit. And so my oldest child was into drugs and alcohol, and my middle child was into these concerts where you go and you lose your mind, whether on alcohol or drugs, and just get crazy. And then my daughter was suffering from depression for a period in her teenage years. So all 3 of them had very unique battles that sucked them in, to the darkness of the world.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of people can relate to that these days, especially the depression thing. It seems to be very rampant, and anxiety as well. And yeah, I can certainly relate to that in my family. So what kinds of things did you try to bring your kids? How did you try to bring them back in line? And did it work, like, at the time?
Right. Well, again, I felt a real call. I wrote 2 books. One is The Parent's Battle Plan. And so it was the nonfiction book of the year in 2023, which really just guides parents into tools and applications and things to work through. And then I came out with this daily devotional, Warfare Parenting, and that was just to keep you strengthened in the battle. So where I'm going with this is, when I look back, I felt isolated. I felt like, am I the only parent that is battling this kid that won't come home on time, or, continues to abuse alcohol in a way that I know is very destructive? And so as I look back, I really believe I tried a lot of things, and the first one was just control. You think, I'm just going to ground them till they can't get out of the house.
Nope.
And those kind
That
of
doesn't
things.
work.
It really doesn't. I guess what really was the turnaround is when it got so bad, I just fell to my knees and said, God, these are your children. You formed them in my womb, and you've asked me to steward them. And I just started really leaning into, man, am I praying for this child? That was probably the biggest aha moment was when I realized, hey, if I'm not praying for my kids to get out of this, then who is?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is powerful. And how long did that take?
Well, that's interesting you should ask because my baby is a girl
Mhm.
and she was around 17, 18 when just a touch of God happened for her. She was battling not fitting in, feeling like maybe life would be better without her in it. Very
Mhm.
dark place. And her and a friend began to pray in a car. And she said immediately she felt God just touch her heart. And she knew it was him because the tears dried up and she had hope again. So my baby girl really didn't um, endure it too long. And then Lawson was in his early 20s. It was my eldest child. I prayed 15 years for God to touch him in a way because I knew deep down, there was nothing in the natural I could do anymore. It was going to have to take a hand of God. And I want to give somebody hope today. My child didn't clean up for God to come in. My son was high on cocaine in an Uber driver's car when the Uber driver started praying for my son out loud. And God came in that Uber and touched Stephen so profoundly. That was the beginning of his turnaround. But it took 15 years, not 15 weeks, 15 months, but 15 years. I would cry out to God and say, God, you've got to help my child get delivered out of this darkness.
Yeah, isn't it amazing how he'll put people in your child's path or in your path, and and sometimes that's what changes everything. That's amazing. So, what led you were mentioning the 2023 book, which wasn't that long ago. So that's long after your kids have gone through a lot of this stuff, and I feel like today's kids might even have it even harder with social media and stuff when it comes to depression and anxiety and whatnot. But Wayne, what led you to believe that traditional parenting methods are insufficient for today's teen crisis?
Well, we are facing a crisis, and I believe there's not a voice strong enough yet. And I hope that we can change that through these books, Warfare Parenting, and hopefully Warfare Parenting small groups all over. We need to give parents the equipment and the empowerment that they are first full in authority. We've even been usurped as parents and grandparents in what authority we have over these children. So I really encourage and empower parents and grandparents and loved ones. Look, you are in charge of that child. Nobody else is. And so I want to leave that. And then, secondly, this is a spiritual battle. This is a spiritual battle. It says that the enemy comes out to seek, kill, and destroy, but we have already found victory in Jesus. So I ask parents to look into their heart and ask God to help them, and then to ask God to help guide their children back to the ways we hoped that we could raise them in.
Hmm. You note that prodigal journeys can occur at various stages of life, including adult prodigals or adult rebellions. So, what is the commonality with these journeys?
I think the commonality is just the darkness. Our media, everything you try, the phones, internet, everything is working against those that are trying to, live right and do right and make good choices. And so, my biggest takeaway would be you can start over at any time. If you've got an adult child, there are a lot of them that have just made, poor choices or continue a self-destructive path. You can just get in there and say, listen, I love you. I'm so sorry that we've encountered all of this. Every day's a new day. And really, you can begin a new day any day.
Oh, that's beautiful. What initial steps should someone take when they realize their child is rebellious or sort of going the wrong way?
Well, the first steps again is just to kind of look into the mirror and first say, am I emulating? Am I doing everything I can to show and model a loving God that's unconditional? And am I living in a way that would be conducive for them to come to me? And so, and I don't say that out of condemnation. I say that just to say, you know what? Make sure. I used to have something on my refrigerator, and I love to hate it. It said, "You can do and say anything you see me say or do." It held me to a real high accountability. But listen, this is not your battle. This is God's battle. This is a spiritual warfare. And all I can give you the strength to do is just stand persistent, stand in authority, and just pray and believe that if God could bring my three prodigals back home, and I'm telling you, it was a long, long battle, He can do it for you too.
Wow, I can't believe all three of them came back they're in good places now. And what are their ages now?
Yeah, so they're 33, 31, and 30,
Hmm.
and two of which are now parents. So I'm a
Yeah.
grandmama.
So this happened a while back, like we're talking 15, 10 years ago, however long ago.
Well, not really. So
Okay.
Stephen was around 27.
Okay.
So that was just 5 years ago when he
Wow.
had that experience
Mm.
and changed his life.
What advice do you have for parents who have been trying to win their child back for years, but nothing seems to be working?
Well, I think communication. That's what I would say. I think sometimes when our kids are rebellious and they don't seem to listen, we kind of step away. And I don't blame you. I've been there. I mean, you just feel like you're, hitting your head against a wall and they're not listening. So again, you can come in with a communication barrier breaker, and that is, hey, listen, I'm sorry if I've done anything. Is there anything we could do to open the door back for us to just try and walk down a path of getting along? You know what I'm saying? Just throw out that olive branch of starting again and saying you're sorry, and just allowing that level of communication to open back up.
Yeah, that's a good idea, especially if there's been a barrier there for several years and maybe they're not speaking, to their parent or
Or you're
something.
angry, you're as the parent, you're like, man, what else can I do for this kid? And I often suggest sometimes writing a letter, just letting them read your thoughts, that you love them and you want the best for them and you're there for them, but you cannot stand by and maybe watch them make these choices that are ultimately not going to be their best.
And then, I guess any advice for the single parents with wayward kids? I feel like they have even that much more of a burden on them, especially if there's other kids too that they're, trying to contend with and worry about as well.
That's right. And listen, I hate to tell you, but we're dealing more with single households
Hmm.
than ever before here in America. So many parents are doing this alone. What I can suggest, and I know it's best, is to get with that ex or that father and say, listen, we've got to be on the same page. It's a scriptural reference. It says, a house divided will never stand. And you say it for the love and sake of your child. Hey, we may not get along. We live in separate homes and households, but we've got to get on the same page for the benefit of this child.
Hmm. And then, the reality is that not all prodigal stories have happy endings, unfortunately. So, what message can you share with those who are, still estranged, or maybe they have even lost a rebellious kid?
Well, I touch on that in the Parents Battle Plan. I have a whole chapter about when the miracle you expected didn't happen.
Mm.
But I encourage parents, the miracle is staying in relationship with God
Hmm.
because He is sovereign. And there are not always good outcomes. We've got a fentanyl poisoning epidemic where our kids, are not waking up. So I just encourage you, don't let that keep you from enjoying what God had in store for you. And that takes a miracle. That takes the Holy Spirit and God's strength to carry on, even when our children may not even make it in their earthly life down here.
Yeah, that's sad. When a prodigal returns, what are some steps to facilitate forgiveness and healing? I know you sort of touched on that, but is it important to remember that rebuilding trust and growth and spiritual growth together takes time?
Does. It does.
Yeah.
And I say the two most powerful words in any relationship is I'm sorry. And if you both reciprocate that, and again, come together and say, boy, was that a road. I don't want to go back down, and you don't either. What are some ways that we can build on this together? And it is powerful, and it involves them and you. And it really doesn't matter what age they are. That can begin again at any age.
Yeah, no, exactly. In hindsight, do you think that maybe God turned what the enemy meant for harm into something good? It seems that way.
It does, and I believe, it's hard to see it in the fight. So again, I want to give someone hope today. It's hard. I call it the meantime. In the middle of, calling out to God, please change my child, and them turning around is the meantime because, the enemy knows he wants to distract you and discourage you. So today, I hope this brings you hope that, you know what, my kids today are, man, they are helping so many, not only other parents, but people that are in bad places and saying, look, he did it for me. And let me show you some of the steps. And I want to tell you, they all believe that at some points we kind of lose hope for others. And we're all big believers that we have until our last breath to turn our lives around.
Yeah, and I'm sure that your kids, especially if they're in any type of leadership role, counseling, guidance, anything like that. I mean, I'm sure their stories are that much more powerful because they have been through it themselves and they sort of understand what the younger mind and the younger heart can be susceptible to.
Yes, and they get it. I mean, they were living it, and they know what entices you, and they know how hard the battle is. And you're right about social media. It is so much of a greater influence, to these kids. So it's everywhere. The battle is everywhere.
Yeah. Sometimes it starts with yourself as well. Sometimes God needs to change your heart so that you can, communicate with your child better instead of always maybe harping at them or you're doing this or that. I've got some stories in my own family where that has happened and like it just changed everything when it's the person that's standing in judgment that needs to change.
Right. And a big pivotal point for me was I'm very boisterous, as you can tell, and very vivacious. So I had to learn to pause and not panic because my first response in the 2 o'clock in the morning phone call, are they in jail? Have they flipped another car? Instead of panic, I learned to pause and just pray. Okay. It helped me kind of, like you're saying, manage my emotions so I can better react to the situations.
Yeah, great advice there, Elaine. We're out of time, but thanks so much for sharing your story with us today. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Lane Lawson Craft is the author of Warfare Parenting, a Daily Battle Plan to Fight for Your Child.
Heart disease is the second leading cause of death in Canada. But did you know that if you live in southern Alberta, your risk of dying from heart disease is even higher? Going to talk about that and more with today's guest who joins us from right here in Lethbridge. Dr. Saye Zielke is a cardiologist and author. She is the physician lead for cardiac sciences in the AHS South Zone, the chair for the Southern Alberta Cardiac Sciences Advisory Cabinet, and is a member of the University of Lethbridge Board of Governors. And she is the medical director of Chinook Cardiology and of the Heart Function Clinic and Cardiac Rehabilitation Program, both part of the Alberta Healthy Living Program of Alberta Health Services. Now, don't ask me to repeat that. That was a mouthful. Great to have you with us, Dr. Zielke.
Thank you so much for having me, sir.
Oh, looking forward to the conversation here today. Now, I understand that residents of Southern Alberta are roughly 30% more likely to die from cardiac-related disease. Now, is this at least in part because we don't have a cardiac catheterization laboratory here?
It's an excellent question. It's likely multifactorial. I mentioned, and to be exact, the relative risk of death is 26.6% higher from cardiovascular disease here in southern Alberta compared to the rest of the province, and that's just not okay. And we have never studied the reasons, but we have some thoughts and hypotheses as to why that may be. We do know that our risk factor profile in the population is about 15% higher compared to the rest of the province. Sadly, our population is less healthy, so that surely contributes to it. We do not have access to the recommended number of cardiologists. Um, and we also have studies that show that the more access to cardiology, the better the outcomes. So that likely contributes to it. And of course, as you mentioned, we do not have access to some of the diagnostic and therapeutic modalities, such as a coronary angiogram, which are now considered standard of care in cardiology.
Right, so we're missing some key components here, and that's all contributing toward that higher risk here in southern Alberta. So, I mean, how many people does this impact every year? I understand it's like more than 1,000. Is that correct?
About just over 1,300 patients are expected or are required to make the trip to Calgary to the coronary angiography suite cath lab in Calgary.
And some maybe even aren't healthy enough to make the journey, and you're kind of stuck, right? So, yeah. Now you've made this your mission, haven't you? I mean, you recently got the keys to the city given to you, and well deserved. So kudos to you there. But you really want to get a cardiac cath lab for southern Alberta. This is important, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I'm humbled by the support of my community, but ultimately, I'm driven by one thing, and that is my patients and my patient care. I cannot emphasize to you how difficult it is when we have a patient that is too sick to airlift to Calgary. You have to sit at the bedside in the ICU, and the frustration of knowing that if you were in Calgary, you'd be rolling them down the hall to get the help, to get them the help that they need, but sometimes they're just too sick to airlift. That's just devastating. It's devastating for the patients, of course, their family, the team that's taking care of them, and some patients have very large number of difficulties commuting to Calgary to access some of the services. Even the patients who are not admitted, who are home but need to make the trip to Calgary. Some are older in our field. Some have no access, no transportation, no way of really getting there. We do try our best not to leave anyone behind and kind of find volunteers to get them to Calgary, but still, it's a big deal. Having care closer to home matters.
Yeah, they're not just numbers, right? I mean, yeah, we're talking, 1,300 people. Well, it's a stat, but each one of those, is a mom, a dad, a grandfather, whatever, a loved one, and they matter. So, I mean, what kinds of crucial procedures does a cath lab actually do? I mean, again, for just somebody watching, I mean, I don't know, what do they do?
Person. So a coronary angiography suite does two things: diagnostics, and also can be used to provide therapy, so therapeutics. So basically, a cath lab or a coronary angiogram, a cardiac catheterization, is allows us to see the coronary arteries better and allows us to measure pressure inside the heart and understand the flows across the valves in the heart, as well as measure pressures in the lungs. So the way that it happens is that typically we freeze the skin in the wrist or on top of the leg, with similar to what a dentist uses to freeze your gums, and pass a small tube or a catheter, we call it, through the artery. We go all the way to the heart, engage the artery in the heart, shoot some dye that lights up under X-ray, and with X-ray machines take a picture or a video of the dye passing through the arteries. Now, if the arteries are narrowed, we will see that because there's dye going through. And also we can, with the wires and catheters we have inside the heart, we can measure flow to understand what is happening with the valves and what are the pressures inside the heart and the lungs. If there are narrowings in the arteries of the heart, then we can open those arteries with a stent and with a balloon. So dilate the artery and put a stent as a scaffolding to keep that artery open. that is what we do with patients who present who have chest pain, who because of the narrowing in the arteries of the heart. But very importantly, that's what we do on urgent basis when patients present with heart attack.
So this again, really, by the sounds of it, is a life-saving thing. I mean, this shows you what's going on, and now you're informed as to what do we need to do. And without that, you're kind of shooting in the dark, right? And you're maybe guessing, you know. And yeah.
Yeah, and standard of care, that's how we practice cardiology. So
Yeah, okay. Well, the good news is, I guess, that the Alberta government has recently finished the planning part of, going ahead with the next stage of getting Lethbridge a cardiac cath lab. So what is that next step then that we need to take?
yeah, so the government of Alberta has announced funding towards functional planning for a cath lab, but also for cardiac sciences in general. In order to have a successful cardiac catheterization program, we will need a support of an updated ICU and CCU, coronary care unit, as well as a cardiology ward and other forms of imaging. So this is an all-encompassing program altogether to hopefully help elevate the care that we provide in Southern Alberta.
Oh, for sure. And is that going to be, are they planning on building that within the existing Lethbridge Chinook Regional Hospital here, or is that going to be like a separate brand new facility they're going to build?
So that's not quite settled, but we do have shelf space, and that's part of the feasibility study. Currently, at the Chinook Regional Hospital, the 4L and 5L, the new part of the buildings are empty. So we'd love to see that used and not sit there empty. We are ready to go. So we're just waiting for the feasibility study to be completed. And then hopefully the government will take the further step in funding it. But in the interim, we have set up the Cardiac Sciences Advisory Cabinet. So with prominent leaders in the community, and have established a relationship with the Chinook Regional Hospital Foundation to fundraise towards this project. And that has been an extremely wonderful and productive project. And our goal is ambitious. We are hoping to raise $30 million by 2027, but
But realistically, I mean, how long do you think it'll be, provided, I guess, that money is raised and so forth, and money coming in from government? I mean, how long would it take to have that new cath lab up and running?
If I had my way, it would be next week. Because every single day that goes by, we potentially lose a life, and that's not acceptable. The sooner the better. I think realistically it will take a couple of years, so 2027 at the earliest, and possibly 2029. But it's really hard to know that until we have done the feasibility study and until we have the full funding in place to build it.
All right. Well, let's pray that good things come in here and quickly, right? And you've been advocating for more cardiologists in Southern Alberta. How many do we need?
So we need quite a few. So when I first came here in 2013, I was the first cardiologist.
Yeah, just like one on your own. That's crazy.
On my own with an amazing team who's still with me. But but now we are 6 cardiologists across the zone, which is fantastic. The Canadian Medical Association has put a recommendation out that we should have about 4.1 cardiologists per 100,000 population. Our catchment area is above 300,000. So we think at least 12 would be a good place
and
to
you've
start.
Got 6 now?
We have 6.
Okay.
And in the U.S., just for your information, there's about 38.6 cardiologists for every 100,000. So that's quite a bit high.
Wow, that's insanely higher. That's like
it is.
wow, that just boggles my mind. So you're saying our standard of care should be about, you're saying, was it 12 per 300,000? And so in the States that would be, wow. I mean, how many times higher? Wow.
Yeah. 4.1 would be the Canadian recommendation. And as I mentioned to you earlier, Paul, there is a correlation between the number of cardiologists and outcomes and access to care. So, but the good news is that we are very aggressively recruiting, and there are at least 2, if not 3 cardiologists that are planning to start practice before the end of the year. So we're very thrilled with that.
Okay, yeah. Oh, wow, we've got a ways to go, though, for sure. Yeah. Any thoughts you have on preventative measures for heart health? I mean that's half the battle, I guess, right? If we had less cases to deal with that way because there was something there to prevent the heart disease from happening, that would be a huge help. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. I think prevention is fundamental and foundational to the care. As I mentioned to you, we have a population that has higher risk factor profile, more diabetes, more rate of smoking, higher blood pressures, and it's very important that we address that. That's very close to my heart. I spend my free time, extracurricular activity, kind of writing about that and putting information together because I think it's critical. Nothing can take the place of prevention. Of course, intervention and treatment is life-saving, but like you already mentioned, Paul, we need to take it a step back and start where the problem begins, which is prevention.
Yeah, a lot of that, again, dealing with our diet and with exercise and so forth, and just healthy living, right? I know you've written a book on that as well. So, well, we are running out of time, but I want to say a big thank you to you and your team working with you for all the efforts you put in to save lives here in Southern Alberta. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paul, for covering this.
Oh, you bet. Dr. Saye Zielke, she's the Medical Director of Chinook Cardiology in Lethbridge. I'm Paul Arthur. Thanks so much on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News for watching.